Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Miyagi Mornings, episode 20. It's pretty cool that we've already gotten to episode 20 of this little YouTube series, or I should say online video series, because it's good on YouTube and it's better at Odyssey, where they actually believe in freedom and free speech. And I just figure it's only a matter of time before YouTube shuts down my channel, so you might as well jump ahead of the game and get on over to Odyssey and subscribe to me over there. Anyway, and that's Odyssee, Odyssey, like you can see the truth. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about something completely non-controversial. I don't expect that I would get banned for talking about stuff like this, but you just never know. Gardening could be kind of one of the more dangerous things in the world to the people in charge of the world, as people being self-sufficient and self-reliant. Yeah, gardening is a insurrectionist act in 2020. The question today is really a gardening tactic, though, and that is, what should you build your raised beds with if you're going to build raised beds? And what this person said is, hey, my vehicle, I can't really transport landscape timbers. Don't have really the room for it. And they're expensive compared to cinder blocks, which are cheap. Would you ever build a raised bed, Jack, with cinder block? Or am I crazy for even thinking about it? Now, let's just start off with a basic answer to the question. I would have no problems building raised beds out of cinder blocks. They are fairly inexpensive, but if you work out the linear footage, it's not that much less expensive than landscape timbers, depending on what you're putting them together with, right? So if you're doing something that's really high strength and you're using something like structural wood screws, you'll have more money in the wood screws than you will have in the timber in a landscape timber based raised bed. But there's no reason to do that. You can use a big drill, and you can use rebar, pre-cut rebar of specific lengths and stuff like that. We did that with the ones I built, and then at the higher levels we went to just basically galvanized nails, and it was very inexpensive to do that way. But I would say, yeah, probably per linear foot plus foot of rise, it probably would cost a little bit less to do with cinder block. There are some trade-offs, and here's one of them. Like, you want your bed level. So if you're going to level cinder block, you kind of have to, at least on the first course, or if you're more than one course, level every block individually. With a wood-framed bed, you just kind of basically rough out a level, and then you build your first frame, and you stabilize it, and then you put a level on it, and then you shim it until it's level, and then you backfill underneath it. So it's much easier to level your first course if you're doing a timber frame than doing something like concrete block. So it's just less labor on that first course. And depending on what kind of ground you have, that can be a lot of work or it can be a little bit of work. It all depends on how much it'll save you. Longevity. Of course, cinder blocks will last longer than you will unless somebody hits them with a sledgehammer. And landscape timbers, depending on where you live, how moist everything is, what your overall conditions are, can last anywhere from, I've seen timber frame beds go 20 years. I've torn out retaining walls as part of the construction work that we did in the past that were 15 to 20 years old, and the timbers were still solid. And I've had other people tell me they've had timber frames rot out in 5 to 7 years. I think it all depends on a lot of environmental factors and how you maintain and manage them. I definitely recommend, if you put in timber frame or pressure treated lumber for a raised bed, that around the circumference you install landscape fabric as a vapor barrier between the soil and the lumber. And that will dramatically, and I mean dramatically, extend the life expectancy of that. Another thing that you can do is to lay down a thin strip. And I should have done this when I built the big raised beds in my yard, and I didn't. It was one of those things I let slip through. But a strip wider than the bottom lumber, whatever that is, of the material that they use to make pond liners out of. You don't need a super expensive version thereof, just the low-end version. And that'll also help with some edge weed blocking as well. Cover that up. Nobody will see it. If the first timber is to the point where it's just pretty much under the ground, you can even kind of cup it around it, and that will help as well. On the expense side, that's going to be debatable. I think that whenever you're evaluating any material for a project, there's other things you can make raised beds out of. You can make them out of brick. You can make them out of tree timber. I mean, we've done them out of, like, when we have, like, trees that have to go down anyway, and you have reasonably straight trunk tree, it's free lumber, boom, stick it in place. We've done all kinds of things, native rock. And a lot of times raised beds, that's what you're going to do. You're going to use what you have available to you, and if you don't have anything available, then you're going to source materials, right? Now, if you are sourcing materials, and you're going to Home Depot, Lowe's, etc., when people say, like, I don't have a vehicle to transport this stuff, I think one thing you guys should be aware of is how efficient delivery service from Lowe's and or Home Depot really is. Almost everything that they will deliver on a truck, they will deliver for a flat fee of either $50 or $65, depending on where you are and some other things. That might seem expensive if you're getting 10 landscape timbers, and it would be. What I try to do, and this saves me a ton of money and Lowe's is who I use because they're the easier parking lot to get in and out of, so I have the relationship there. And that's literally how I pick between them. Like the Home Depot parking lot that's close to me, like you feel like you're taking your life into your hands when you go into that parking lot with getting into a wreck. And the Lowe's parking lot's nice and open, so that's the only reason I picked Lowe's over Home Depot. But Lowe's will generally deliver anything I order for $50. So what I will do is I will evaluate upcoming projects, and I will do what's called a takeoff, which is basically an estimate if you were in construction estimating and you're going to sell a job. I'll do my own takeoff for my own projects. Every single thing that I need for that project from end to end. And instead of doing it for one project, I'll map out 2 or 3 projects, maybe 4. If they're little, I'll do 4. If they're big, maybe 2. And I will make up that bill of materials. I will put all of that in the shopping cart for Lowe's, and I will say order. And if I had a truck capable of getting all of that material, I would still give them $50 to not have to go haul that much. I mean, if you're talking like some bags of sackcrete, some cinder block, a bunch of landscaping timbers, a bunch of pipe, like when you start adding that stuff up, like first of all, you're going to end up taking multiple trips most of the time if you have a pickup truck, even with a pipe rack or a trailer. You got to be there for all that time. You got to haul all that shit. And the Lowe's guy comes out with this big ass truck, backs up, gets that little cool-looking forklift off, beep, beep, beep. I say, put it there. He puts it right there, and I do no work. So, if you were just getting enough landscaping timbers to build 2 raised beds, that probably doesn't make sense. But for all of you with your projects, evaluate what you're doing. Then you don't spend, like right now, you don't spend a freaking hour and a half in a freaking Lowe's or a Home Depot dealing with a bunch of scared people that look like sheep running around with their masks on, horrified of everything, wait in line and all. It's totally worth $50. Totally worth it. That's my big thing. And again, as far as the materials you construct your bed with, I don't think it really matters. I really don't. Whatever works for you. But what I'll finish up with is, do you need raised beds? Why are you putting in a raised bed? Why are you using extra money and extra materials? Here's where raised beds make sense. You don't have much soil to begin with. You just don't have much soil there. Okay, I get it. That's me. So my plants can't put down deep roots because they can't go through rock. Okay, that makes sense. You're in a climate where better drainage is really, you get too much precipitation. That makes sense. Cooler climates often make sense. They pull plants up a little higher. They're a little more resilient to frost. You have a lot of trouble with infiltration of weeds and grasses and stuff like that. Creating a border gives your mind a clear delineated space. Anything that, it's like guard the gate. Anything that comes across must die, and that is useful. But like where I grew up in Pennsylvania, we had about a 1/4 acre garden. We didn't make no raised beds. We didn't bring in, a whole bunch of fill to do that much. We basically created rows and we had pathways and it was right in the ground and it worked perfectly. But we had good soil. We had a nice location, generally flat. It was pretty easy to maintain. If I knew what I know now as a kid, I would have done a lot less digging in spring, redefining the edges of the beds and cutting grass and weeds with an edger and a line like my grandfather had me do, and I would have been a little bit more permanent. But there, in that location, if I were to move back to my dad's home today and put a garden in where the old garden spot was, I wouldn't put a single raised bed in. So make sure you're not expending extra money, time, labor, and materials where it's not necessary, because man's been growing stuff in the ground for as long as man's been growing stuff, but sometimes a raised bed is the right way to go. That wraps up the week. Remember, you can catch the entire week on Saturday mornings with a podcast that's in the Survival Podcast feed for Miyagi Mornings, the whole week put together in an audio-only podcast. Or you can check these videos out and share them with your friends because they're a lot shorter than a whole podcast, and they always key in on one thing. Catch you guys later. Hope you enjoyed the week.